Hello, I'm Erin Thomas, and I would like to welcome you to this training presentation for the Clovis Community College Instructor SLO form that we use for our assessment process. This form was most recently updated in May of 2021. Hopefully, by the end of this training, you will understand all the various parts of the SLO form. You'll be familiar with the language and the terms used in the SLO form because there have been a few changes. You'll know where to add supplementary charts and explanations, know how to enter SLOs and add or delete lines, understand the importance of specifically defining the tools and the assessment expectation criteria, and know how to close the loop and denote changes for our next academic year. I will be going over these forms and showing us all of those objectives with an example form from Content Area 1. There is an assessment training video outline that was available to print, so this would be the right time to start following along with that paper as well. Let's take a look at our example form. Again, I mentioned we're looking at Content Area 1. We have 6 content areas and a non-general education form. The differences in the different forms include the titles being different. As I clicked in this top cell where we see Content Area, Area 1, Communications, that will be different for every area. We have mathematics, we have science, etc. And we see just below the title a chart for New Mexico essential skills. We have 5 possible New Mexico essential skills, and each content area highlights a different set of New Mexico essential skills. As you can see, Content Area 1 highlights number 1, 2, and 3. And those are shaded in gray to show you that these are the skills your course address. This shading is repeated in 2 more areas on the form that I'm going to go ahead and show you. There are 3 rows right here that also reflect the New Mexico essential skills, 1, 2, and 3. And there's another area, if you can follow my arrow down in the little further down the worksheet, I'm circling it with my cursor. Essential skill 1, 2, and 3. So that will be highlighted for clarity in those 3 places. They will be pre-highlighted for you so you know what you are looking at. We'll be checking out this form, this worksheet, kind of top to bottom, left to right, and I'll be showing you each section. So this kind of to me was section 1, the title section and the highlighting of the first New Mexico essential skills. If I scroll just a little bit down on the worksheet, just a little bit, I have sort of a middle left section. This section has the repeated gray shading. On the right of the gray shaded rows, you have a different category of how your course is expressing these New Mexico essential skills. Is your course, are your students at an emerging level, a developing level, or a proficient level? A lot of entry-level courses might be at a emerging or developing level, whereas a more advanced course will be at a developing, maybe even proficient level, especially a very advanced course at the proficient level. It means we expect them to be proficient with those skills, or we expect them to be continuing to develop. In an entry-level course, again, we might be expecting those just to be starting. We might be introducing these skills. So we are denoting that for our records. Okay. I'm going to stay in the top of the worksheet and slide it a little bit right, I think. Okay, top of the worksheet, sliding it to the right, where I have, there we go, another field where I'm going to enter some of my course demographic information, if you will. Things like your section number, the instructor name, number of enrolled students. This is your total number of students. When you completed, the report author, which is probably in the instructor, and your division chair. Okay, here's our demographic information. Just below that is what could be a really interesting and useful field. Two fields. We have the top field, this cell I'm highlighting, that could give some explanations. We can write explanations regarding charts, graphs, or tables. And below this explanation cell, we have an empty cell where you could enter a chart, graph, or table. So we can explain our charts, graph, and tables up here, explain why we have them, what is our rationale, are we showing some sort of a pie chart or bar graph that shows how a tool or an assessment works very well, does not work. It's really a free-for-all and kind of an interesting area. So I like that. I think with if you're able to start utilizing Canvas outcomes, then you may be able to build some pretty interesting charts or graphs that you could include in this area. It's not a requirement. I'm going to scroll down on our worksheet, head back over to the left. Like I said, we're kind of going top to bottom, left and right. So I'm kind of in my lower left quadrant of this worksheet. And this is where we start looking at our own specific SLOs. Our course already has SLOs written, and we need to just list them, begin listing them in this field to the very left. SLO 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on this worksheet. As we can see, only 2 of them are filled out right now. And I imagine this course has a few more SLOs, but you might have 3, 4, 5 SLOs. I think you may have to have no less than 5 SLOs. I believe that's the base that all of your blank worksheets will come with. But what if you have more SLOs like I actually have in my course? I have 10. So what I need to do is add a row. And I'm going to highlight, I grabbed it all. Nope. I'm going to highlight that whole row. Let me try again. All the way over, highlight. And I'm going to right click, copy, click right below in the space that I want to paste it. I'm going to right click and paste. As you can see, I added a row. It does say SLO 5, but I can change that to a 6. And I've added a row. So I have 10 in my class and I would need to add a few more rows. But let's say, oh, yay, I got to take one away. I'm going to delete this row. I highlighted the whole row and I can right click and cut. Or you can delete, but I'm just going to cut. Or I'm going to delete. Okay, I deleted. So that is how we would add or delete a row if you need more or less SLOs on your worksheet. I'm going to scroll back up to where we begin entering our data. And I have listed SLO 1. I have a definition of the SLO. In this case, it is define and describe basic interpersonal communication terms and concepts. So what tool was used to describe and interpret terms and concepts here? What tool did we use to assess this SLO? So I'm going to see if I can't zoom in just a little so we can all see this better. Okay. I'm looking at, I want to be very descriptive and specific about my tool. We really need to understand what we did, and it will help us understand why we did it and maybe give us more of a basis to go from if we want to make changes. So assessment tool 1, movie analysis and presentation. Students write a movie relationship analysis paper in which they identify interpersonal communication concepts, provide a detailed analysis of those concepts and how they are demonstrated in the film. So you can see that really does very well match what the SLO is asking to describe and define. So by writing a paper to include these concepts and analysis of description and analysis of terms, this tool is very good. You wouldn't want to have your tool be a multiple choice quiz for this because it's not defining or describing anything. That might be, recognize could be good for a multiple choice test, but I think defining and describing is very well analyzed through an essay or a paper. We want to really be careful with that. Now you see there's just one assessment tool here. I do want to mention there are spaces for 3 assessment tools. It's a little bit cautioned against using multiple tools for one SLO because you could have different outcomes for different tools. And when it comes down to it, it's hard to explain why. And there could be too many variations. Is one tool better than the other? Does one tool, is that irrelevant? Is not a good tool? Why would one tool, is it harder? Why are they different? Why are the scores different? So you want to use caution in using multiple tools for one SLO. But if you do use more than one tool, you're going to, at the tabulation point, which we'll get to in a second, you're going to average the scores. You're going to average all of your results between tools. We'll be able to see that a little better as I scroll to the right. So after you've described the assessment tool or tools you're using very well, we come over to this area that does use some new language. We used to use the words benchmark and threshold, but we've changed the language here to be very explicit about what we're looking for. We want to see which students minimally satisfy your SLO requirements. They meet your expectations. How many students minimally satisfy those SLO requirements? What is our expectation of that number? How many do we want to just barely meet our expectations? And if we're aiming for the stars, which we should, how many of our students do we want to exceed expectations, where they strongly satisfy the SLO requirements? Well, now thinking about this, minimally satisfy and strongly satisfy have a lot of different possibilities. So when we come down to this block, we want to really explain and describe what those criteria are. What does minimally satisfy mean? In this case, the criteria to meet expectations and minimally satisfy the SLO requirement is that 75% of assessed students meet or exceed the standards in the grading rubric criteria 1, 2, and 3. That means there's a grading rubric criteria attached to this SLO and Canvas outcomes. That's another discussion, but that's a good way to be able to quickly look at your results and your SLOs and things like that. But this is the criteria. If these students met or exceeded the standards from the rubric criteria 1, 2, and 3, we want 75% of the students in this course to meet that expectation. Now, this instructor would really, really like 20% of assessed students to exceed the standards and grading rubric criteria 1, 2, and 3. So not just meet the standards and grading rubric criteria 1, 2, and 3, but exceed. I have an example here that I would use. Let's see, I wrote it on my outline. because I think also for the criteria to exceed expectations, I would even add maybe a little more to that. But I have another example I'm just going to say out loud. So for a meet expectations, I would put 75% of students meet or exceed a score of 70% on the final exam. So I even went a little bit in a different direction where I even named the score instead of a rubric criteria that students would have to get. So if I had 75% of my students at least meet 70% or more, that would satisfy my meets expectations. But to exceed my expectations, I would like 25% of students to meet or exceed a score of 90% on the final exam. So that's just a little different take on that. Everybody's going to be different, which still gives us all of our creative freedom and whatnot. But we just need to make sure that we're using very specific language in these areas between the tools and here at our assessment criteria. So I will continue to scroll a little bit to the right. I'm still in this lower half of the worksheet. And we looked at these areas a little earlier. I showed you the additional, this is the last of the 3 shaded gray areas that identify which New Mexico essential skill that you are looking at. In this area, we are able to specify the components of those skills that are being addressed in this particular SLO. So in this particular SLO, the component skills from essential skill 1 are A, B, C. Now, where do I get this A, B, and C from? I'm going to scroll up on my worksheet all the way to the top. And for this, I will zoom out just a bit so it doesn't get lost in the field of vision here. I just scrolled up. Look, I'm down here. I was looking at these, A, B, C at my little quadrants, but I come up and I can see in my big blocks of shaded gray areas that I have component skills. In number 1, I have an A, B, and C. Number 2, I have an A, B, C, D. Number 3, I have an A, B, C, D. So which of these skills are being addressed by SLO 1? And if I scroll back down to this area here, I can see skill 1, 2, 3, and in each box I have specified which skills, which component skills it's looking at. I'll zoom one more time. Got a little better. Okay, here are my New Mexico component skills per essential skill. This instructor went further to identify component skills that weren't required for their content area. I don't imagine that every SLO will hit every component skill. You're just labeling the ones that it does hit. But it does tell you in the essential skills, there's a top asterisk, which I will just scroll up to because I want it to be zoomed in for reading. In essential skill 1, you're going to have to hit in your course A, B, and C. All of these must be addressed at some point. In the skills for critical thinking, again, all component skills must be addressed. So A, B, C, and D must be hit at some point during the course. But looking at essential skill 3 over here, only 3/4 of the component skills need to be addressed. So 3 out of 4 of these need to be addressed to satisfy the requirements. If we take a look at ours for number 3 over here, essential skill 3, he hit more than the 3/4. There's all of them that were addressed. So we're getting really specific into what exactly we are giving to our students in terms of our own SLOs and how they tie into the New Mexico essential skills and components specifics. All right, after we've got all of our things identified, our information, what we're actually looking for, what tools and what we're looking at, what are we assessing, we can start entering data. Where do you get your data? Well, from your gradebook and Canvas. The one thing that we're going to look at here is the difference in between how many students in your course and how many students were assessed. That'll be the first thing we look at in this data entry field. We've decided that you're not going to be liable for students that did not participate in the assessment. We're only recording the scores of students that did participate. So as I scroll to our demographics, just up the sheet, we have 25 students enrolled in the course. However, only 20 students here were assessed. Out of those 20 students, and we see these in the grade book, out of these 20 students, what did we say is our number for meeting expectations? This is something that I'm entering into this field. I said it was going to be 75%. I'll just hide. Ooh, that's not what I meant to do. Excuse me. I said over here towards the left, which is what I'm trying to move my cursor. I want 75% of assessed students to meet or exceed, which is where I get this number, 75%. So how many students took it? I can check my grade book. What's my number of meeting my expectations? I look over at my criteria to meet expectations, 75%. And when I look back at my grade book, how many of those students passed? How many of those students met the grading rubric criteria 1, 2, and 3? My grade book said 20. So this worksheet tabulated 100% of my students met my expectations. This number was auto-generated, your percentage number. I'm entering, an instructor is entering the number of students assessed, your number for meeting expectations, and then the observed number of students that met expectations. This worksheet will auto-generate the percentage of your students that met expectations. In this case, it's 100. Now, I'm looking at my grade book again. How many of my students, and I only want 20%, I only care if 20% do it, but how many of them actually exceeded my expectations? Who exceeded the standards in the grading rubric criteria 1, 2, and 3? I look at my grade book and I see actually all 20 of them exceeded those expectations. So this worksheet again has auto-tabulated this 100% value. It tells me how many of my students. So these are the numbers I'm looking at in red. Did I hit, in this first case, did I hit 75%? I did hit 75%. That is met. In my exceeds expectations area over here, did I hit 20%? I did hit 20%. So that is also met. I'm going to continue scrolling my worksheet to the right. And I can fill in these values here. Meet expectations? Yes, met. Exceeded expectations for SLO 1? Yes, met. I'm going to give that a value of met or not met. Scrolling a little further to the right with those results, I'm going to take some notes. We really want to consider this idea of closing the loop. Closing the loop really gives purpose, value, and meaning to what we're doing. We are looking at our assessed values, looking at our findings, and we're making changes or improving on things, understanding what we did right and wrong. We don't want to just see that we did things well or did things poorly. We want to be able to take that information and make changes for the better or leave things alone that are working really well. So that's what we're going to be doing by closing the loop. We're going to look at and think about, well, last academic year, how did things go compared to how did things go this year? Had I changed something from last year? Did I use a multiple choice test last year for this SLO, but this year I'm using a written essay to evaluate the SLO. That would be a change. And if I made that change, how did that go? Was it a successful change? Was it a better reflection of what the SLO was asking me to do by describing instead of just identifying? And another thing you would write were maybe some current findings, some things that you noticed that occurred in this current academic year that are noteworthy. Let's look at the changes, the closing the loop section here on this course in content area 1. It was mentioned that there were no changes from last year. This is the second year students were provided with a video containing instructions and a printable example of a project containing all required elements. So that instructor found the assessment tool to be successful and useful last year and did it again. Also, all students exceeded this standard. 5 students had no submission, very noteworthy. The instructor video and example appeared to be achieving the desired results. So that's noting that the people who took the assessment seem to be doing well. The tools will be retained for the use in the future. So what are we going to do? We mentioned 5 students had no submission. How and where are we going to address that? Well, let's look in our next box, our next cell area over here. Changes to be implemented for next academic year and the anticipated amount of improvement. So considering what we've talked about in closing the loop, and if we thought our practices were good or need changing, or if we made any observations, we're going to talk about that over in this field and discuss what changes would be made. In our case, for this assignment, no changes are being considered to this assessment tool. It's a solid tool, so that's good. But hey, 5 students had no submission. Maybe there's something we could think about or consider in terms of engagement. So the student will work to keep, or we will work, instructors, we will work to keep students engaged in the course and make a concerted effort to use the early alerts and referrals to assist potentially struggling students. Awesome, using campus services. Another thing I thought of there, just as on a personal level looking at it, is I might even think of, if I wasn't familiar with Quality Matters online instruction practices, I might look into some of the ways that they use tools to help with the ease of navigation in online courses, accessibility for all students, and the way that it's promoted to create meaningful delivery, content, interaction, and learning activities. So for Quality Matters principles, that can also help with engagement if we're having troubles with students using tools or even maybe doing anything. Maybe they don't know how to get through it. But I like these suggestions, using the early alerts and referrals, things like that. So you can come up with whatever changes that make sense to you. These are the basics of filling out one of these SLO forms. Let me take it all the way back out a little bit so we can look at the whole thing again at one time. Okay. Again, like I said, there are several different forms for the different content areas. I'd like to take a look. It looks like, okay, I wanted to go down. This is an interesting field. Looking at this from the zoomed out view, you can see the red square. My cursor is circling around this red square. Well, in SLO2 for this course, SLO2, it looks like there might be some kind of problem. Let's zoom back in. It's a flag, our red flag telling us there's a problem. The problem is not with your form. It's highlighting for you that there's a not met aspect to this SLO. So that's a good visual reminder or representation of a problem area. Let's go ahead just so we can go through one more example of some good explanations of our tools. SLO2 asks us to identify and analyze. Identify and analyze. We want our tools to match, identify and analyze interpersonal communication across a variety of personal and professional contexts in both face-to-face and mediated forms. So we have 2 assessment tools for this. And in both of the assessment tools, we have some very good explicit criteria. We're using numbers and identifying which grading rubric criteria. 75% for our meets expectations. Again, 20% for exceeds expectations in this course. All of our component skills are identified. And when it comes time to enter the information, we had 24 students use the first tool. 24 students participated in this first assessment tool. Out of 24, only 17 met the criteria, which was a 71%. So slightly lower, which was, remember, auto-tabulated by this worksheet, lower than our criteria of 75%. So we got flagged for a not met, although our exceeds expectations was way higher than the 20%. We got flagged for a not met. Now, this is where I think an interesting point comes in, because we have 2 assessment tools for this SLO right on top of each other, 2 assessment tools. But in the second assessment tool, they were both found met. So what the guidance from the assessment council is right now would be to average these values. So if this is a 90% and a 71%, that will average higher, I think, than a 75%, and it would come out met. Now, this does lend the question, well, why did so many students take assessment tool 1 and not assessment tool 2 here? More students took it, did worse, than less students taking it, doing better. So that to my eyes, it lends a lot of questions to what's going on there, which kind of makes it more difficult when you use more than one assessment tool. But those are things to consider, details to consider and use. You can use more than one assessment tool, but just use it cautiously and mindfully. Okay, so when you have not met decisions, you get highlighted in red and you can see what's going on there. I will zoom out again and see if there were any more big things that popped out to show everyone. You can see the blank spaces down here below where you would be entering all of this information for yourself. SLO, assessment tool. You can delete lines if you, or just not use them. Don't delete. This would probably change the shape in the assessment tool section anyway. Just don't use them. And go across the worksheet. You can add lines again by highlighting the whole thing and copying and pasting. So thank you for taking the time to look at our newest assessment form. I hope this helps clarify how to fill out this form and what everything means. And good luck, best wishes with your SLO forms. Thank you for watching.